The morning of Solar Standard 2387.156 began like any other at the prestigious Nexus Prime Training Complex, the galaxy's premier facility for developing the combat capabilities of various species across the known universe. The complex, spanning 47 square kilometers of reinforced durasteel and quantum-stabilized matter, had stood as a testament to interspecies cooperation for over 3 centuries. Its training floors had been tested by the crushing gravity manipulations of the Gorvani, the plasma-based attacks of the Zephyrians, and even the reality-bending psionics of the enigmatic Voidwalkers. Yet nothing in its extensive history had prepared the facility for what would occur on that seemingly routine day. Commander Takvar of the Reptilian Hegemony stood at his usual position overlooking Training Floor 7, his scales rippling with the subtle color changes that indicated his current mood, a mixture of professional interest and barely concealed disdain. At 8 feet tall and possessing the muscular build typical of his warrior species, Takvar commanded respect through presence alone. His forearms, each capable of crushing standard metals, were crossed as he observed the latest batch of recruits from various worlds preparing for their daily assessment trials. Another batch of soft-worlders, he muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Zelnara, whose own impressive 7-foot frame seemed diminutive next to her commander. The hegemony had long prided itself on producing the galaxy's finest warriors, creatures born on high-gravity worlds where survival demanded constant adaptation and strength. To them, most other species appeared fragile, almost decorative in their perceived weakness. The training floor below buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 different species went through their morning preparations. The Crystallians, beings of living mineral who could reshape their bodies at will, practiced their defensive formations with methodical precision. The Aryans, graceful humanoids with gossamer wings and the ability to manipulate atmospheric pressure, performed aerial maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of flight dynamics. Even the diminutive Technari, barely 3 feet tall but capable of interfacing directly with any electronic system, demonstrated their unique abilities by simultaneously controlling dozens of training drones. Among this diverse assembly stood a figure that drew particular attention, though perhaps not for the reasons she might have preferred. Sarah Chen appeared almost comically out of place among the gathered warriors and specialists. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, with the lean build of someone who stayed fit through discipline rather than necessity, she represented what many considered the galaxy's newest and least impressive addition to the interspecies community. Earth had been contacted by the Galactic Federation only 18 months prior, when their long-range sensors had detected the first successful human faster-than-light experiments. The planet had been classified as a developing world, its inhabitants showing promise in technological advancement but lacking the obvious physical advantages that made other species valuable to the Federation's military and exploration arms. Humans were seen as potential scientists, perhaps engineers, but certainly not warriors. Sarah had volunteered for the training program not out of some misguided belief in human superiority, but because she understood something that the galaxy's other species had not yet grasped about her people. Humans possessed a unique relationship with adversity, one forged through millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried repeatedly to kill them. Ice ages, volcanic winters, plagues, predators, and countless other challenges had shaped humanity in ways that comfortable, specialized evolution on more hospitable worlds had not replicated in other species. She had spent the previous 6 months at Nexus Prime being consistently underestimated, overlooked, and often openly mocked. Her test scores were adequate but unremarkable. Her physical capabilities, while impressive by human standards, appeared mediocre when compared to species that could manipulate gravity, phase through matter, or regenerate lost limbs. The instructors had placed her in remedial classes, assumed she was there through some kind of administrative error, and generally treated her as a curiosity rather than a serious candidate. This morning, however, would be different. This morning, Sarah Chen had reached what humans call a breaking point. Not a moment of weakness, but a moment of transformation. The day's exercise was simple in concept but brutal in execution. A combat assessment against progressively more challenging opponents, both mechanical and biological, designed to test not just physical capability, but adaptability, strategic thinking, and psychological resilience. Each species would demonstrate their abilities against opponents specifically chosen to challenge their known strengths and expose potential weaknesses. Sarah watched as the Gorvani representative, a creature resembling a mobile boulder with multiple eyes and manipulator appendages, faced off against a series of increasingly dense training constructs. Each construct was designed to test gravitational manipulation abilities, and the Gorvani excelled, crushing opponents that would have pancaked most other species into paste. The assembled observers nodded approvingly, making notes on their quantum tablets about technique and efficiency. The Zephyrian representative followed, its plasma-based attacks reducing training targets to their component atoms with precision that bordered on artistry. Even the notoriously difficult-to-impress hegemony instructors acknowledged the display with grudging respect. When Sarah's turn came, the murmur of conversation in the observation area didn't even pause. She was expected to perform adequately, perhaps demonstrate some of the tool use and problem-solving abilities that had made humans interesting to the Federation's scientific community, and then move on to the next, more impressive candidate. The first opponent was a standard combat drone, roughly humanoid in shape but equipped with energy shields and projectile weapons. It was designed to provide a moderate challenge to species with enhanced reflexes or natural armor. For most candidates, it represented a warm-up exercise. Sarah approached the drone with what observers would later describe as unusual calm. She had spent months studying not just the technical specifications of the training equipment, but the psychological profiles of every species she had encountered. She understood that she was being dismissed, underestimated, and essentially written off as irrelevant. For a human, this was not an insult. It was an opportunity. The drone activated its weapon systems and began firing plasma bursts designed to test defensive capabilities. Sarah did something that surprised everyone watching. She didn't try to dodge them all. Instead, she analyzed the firing pattern, took several hits to non-critical areas while studying the weapon's timing and trajectory calculations, and then moved forward in a pattern that the drone's programming couldn't effectively track. Her first strike was precise rather than powerful, targeting the drone's primary optical sensor with a hand strike that utilized leverage and momentum rather than raw strength. The drone, temporarily blinded, compensated by switching to thermal detection. Sarah had anticipated this and had been breathing in a specific pattern designed to minimize her heat signature while maximizing the efficiency of her oxygen intake. What happened next would later be analyzed by xenobiologists across the galaxy as a perfect demonstration of human adaptability. Rather than attempting to match the drone's technological advantages with superior firepower or exotic abilities, Sarah began systematically exploiting the weaknesses inherent in its design philosophy. She used the environment, turning the drone's own weapons against it by positioning herself so that missed shots damaged the drone's mobility systems. She employed psychological warfare, making unexpected noises and movements that confused its behavioral prediction algorithms. Within 7 minutes, she had disabled a combat drone that typically required 15 to 20 minutes for most species to defeat, and she had done it without sustaining any significant injury. More importantly, she had done it in a way that demonstrated not just tactical thinking, but a form of adaptability that the observers had never seen before. The second opponent was a biomechanical construct designed to test combat effectiveness against opponents with superior physical capabilities. It stood 9 feet tall, possessed 4 arms equipped with energy weapons and molecular blades, and had armor plating that could withstand most conventional attacks. It was typically reserved for species known for their combat prowess, like the hegemony warriors or the crystalline adamants. Sarah studied the construct for nearly a full minute before engaging, circling it slowly while it tracked her movement. The observers began to murmur with impatience, expecting her to begin the standard attack patterns that most species employed. Instead, she was gathering information, testing reaction times, studying the construct's balance and movement patterns. When she finally attacked, it was with a combination of speed, precision, and tactical thinking that caught everyone, including the construct's AI, completely off guard. She didn't attempt to match its strength or armor. Instead, she targeted the joints between armor plates, used its own momentum against it, and employed a fighting style that combined elements of human martial arts with principles she had observed from other species during her time at the facility. The construct adapted quickly, as it was designed to do, but Sarah adapted faster. This was the key difference that the observers were beginning to notice. While other species excelled at applying their natural advantages to overcome challenges, humans excelled at becoming something new in response to each challenge they faced. The battle lasted 12 minutes, with the construct growing increasingly aggressive as its programming recognized that standard tactics were ineffective. Sarah responded by becoming more unpredictable, incorporating environmental elements, psychological tactics, and combat techniques that the construct had never encountered before. When she finally defeated it, she did so by using its own weapon against it in a way that demonstrated not just tactical brilliance but an understanding of physics and engineering that surprised the technical observers. She had turned a straightforward combat assessment into a masterclass in adaptive problem-solving. Commander Takvar had stopped making his usual dismissive comments. His scales had shifted to the deep blue that indicated intense concentration, mixed with something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. "Bring in the Devastator," he ordered. The Devastator was not typically used in standard assessments. It was a training construct designed to test the absolute limits of a species' combat capabilities, reserved for final examinations and advanced certification trials. Standing 12 feet tall and equipped with weapons systems that could challenge even hegemony shock troopers, it represented a significant escalation in threat level. Lieutenant Zelnara hesitated. "Sir, standard protocol suggests—" "I said bring in the Devastator," Takvar repeated, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of the youngest commanders in hegemony history. He was beginning to suspect that everything they thought they knew about humans was incomplete, and he intended to find out exactly what they were dealing with. The training floor's reinforced barriers activated as the Devastator entered the arena. This was necessary not just for the safety of the candidate, but for the observers as well. The construct's weapon systems were capable of causing structural damage to the facility itself if not properly contained. Sarah looked up at the observation deck, making eye contact with Commander Takvar for the first time since her assessment began. What he saw in that look would later feature prominently in his reports to Hegemony Command. Not fear, not bravado, but a calm recognition of the challenge ahead, and an absolute certainty that she would find a way to overcome it. The Devastator began its assault immediately, launching attacks designed to overwhelm through sheer firepower and aggression. Its tactical programming was based on the combat styles of the galaxy's most formidable warrior species, and it possessed enough raw power to reduce most opponents to constituent atoms within the first few exchanges. Sarah's response was unlike anything the observers had seen before. She didn't attempt to engage in direct combat, nor did she try to evade the attacks through superior speed or agility. Instead, she began doing something that no other species had ever attempted in similar circumstances. She started learning from the Devastator in real time, adapting her fighting style to incorporate elements of its own tactics, while simultaneously developing countermeasures. The battle that followed would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as a perfect example of what humans would call thinking outside the box. Sarah treated the Devastator not as an enemy to be defeated through superior force, but as a teacher from whom she could learn even while fighting for her life. She began incorporating hegemony combat techniques that she had observed from other candidates, modified with Zephyrian movement patterns and Gorvani gravitational principles that she had studied during her time at the facility. But more than that, she began developing entirely new approaches that combined human adaptability with tactical principles she was inventing in real time. The Devastator's AI, designed to learn and adapt to its opponent's fighting style, found itself in an unprecedented situation. Sarah was changing and evolving faster than its adaptive algorithms could track. Every time it developed a counter to her current approach, she had already moved on to something new. 23 minutes into the engagement, something remarkable happened. Sarah stopped defending and adapting and began to attack with a ferocity and precision that caught everyone off guard. She had spent the first part of the fight learning everything the Devastator could teach her, and now she was ready to demonstrate what a human could accomplish when they had been pushed to their absolute limit. The attacks that followed were a masterpiece of applied physics, tactical thinking, and raw determination. Sarah had identified every weakness in the Devastator's design, understood the principles behind its weapon systems, and developed a fighting style specifically designed to exploit the gaps in its programming. But it was her final attack that would become legendary. The Devastator had cornered her against the reinforced wall of the training chamber, its weapon systems charging for what should have been a finishing strike. Sarah, breathing heavily but with her eyes still sharp with focus, made a decision that would change how every species in the galaxy thought about human potential. She planted her feet, drew back her right fist and threw a punch that incorporated every principle of leverage, momentum and energy transfer that she had learned not just during her time at the facility, but throughout her entire life as a human being who had learned to overcome obstacles through determination and adaptation rather than raw power. The punch itself was not particularly impressive by the standards of species that could manipulate gravity or phase through matter, but what made it remarkable was that it was the culmination of everything Sarah had learned. not just during this fight, but during her entire time at Nexus Prime. It represented 6 months of being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, channeled into a single moment of pure human determination. The punch connected with the Devastator's central processing unit with perfect precision, delivering exactly the right amount of force to the exact point needed to overload its defensive systems. The construct, designed to withstand attacks from the galaxy's most powerful warriors, shut down instantly. But Sarah's punch didn't stop there. The momentum carried through the disabled construct and into the reinforced training floor beneath it. The floor, designed to withstand plasma bombardments, gravitational manipulation, and reality-bending psionic attacks, cracked along a stress line that ran nearly 30 meters in each direction. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, followed by a silence so complete that the facility's atmospheric processes seemed loud by comparison. In the observation deck, Commander Takvar's scales had shifted to a color that his aide had never seen before. Pure white, indicating a level of shock that challenged his fundamental understanding of the universe. Sarah stood in the center of the cracked training floor, breathing heavily but still alert, still ready to continue if necessary. She looked up at the observation deck again, and this time every observer was looking back at her with expressions that ranged from disbelief to something approaching awe. "Assessment complete," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The next several hours were a blur of medical examinations, technical analyses, and increasingly frantic communications with various military and scientific organizations throughout the galaxy. The damage to Training Floor 7 was extensive enough to require complete reconstruction, but the implications of how that damage had been caused were far more significant than the repair costs. Sarah submitted to the examinations with the same calm demeanor she had shown throughout her assessment. When asked how she had developed the techniques she had demonstrated, she explained that humans had a unique approach to problem solving that was based on adaptation rather than specialization. Other species seemed to excel at using their natural advantages, she told the panel of examiners. Humans excel at developing new advantages when our natural ones aren't sufficient. When pressed about the specific training or enhancement programs that had produced her capabilities, she revealed something that stunned her questioners. Everything she had demonstrated was the result of standard human development, combined with the learning opportunities provided by the facility itself. "I spent 6 months watching every species here demonstrate their abilities," she explained. "I studied their techniques, their physical principles, their tactical approaches. Then I figured out how to adapt those lessons to human physiology and psychology." The xenobiologist conducting the interview, a tall, thin ethereal named Dr. Valfar, asked the question that was on everyone's mind: are all humans capable of this level of adaptation and improvement? Sarah's answer would later be quoted in military training manuals across the galaxy. Every human is capable of becoming something more than they were yesterday if they're willing to destroy the weaker version of themselves that existed before. It's not about being naturally superior. It's about refusing to accept limitations as permanent. Commander Takvar filed his report with Hegemony Command that evening, and its contents would fundamentally alter the galaxy's understanding of human potential. His recommendation was simple but revolutionary. Humanity should not be classified as a developing species, suitable primarily for scientific and technical roles, but as a warrior species with unique capabilities that could prove invaluable in military applications. But more than that, he recommended that other species begin studying human approaches to adaptation and self-improvement, because humans had discovered something that the rest of the galaxy had missed: the ability to systematically transform weakness into strength through applied determination and strategic thinking. The report's final paragraph became one of the most quoted passages in interspecies military literature. The human female designated Sarah Chen did not defeat our most advanced training construct through superior physical capabilities or exotic powers. She defeated it by becoming, in the span of a single engagement, something more than she had been when the fight began. If this represents typical human potential, we have severely underestimated not just their current capabilities, but their capacity for future development. The science of human adaptation in the days following what would later be known as the Training Floor Incident. Teams of scientists from across the galaxy descended upon Nexus Prime to study the phenomenon they had witnessed. Dr. Velfar led a multi-species research team in conducting the most comprehensive analysis of human physiology, psychology, and potential that had ever been undertaken. The initial findings were remarkable not for what they revealed about human superiority, but for what they demonstrated about human adaptability. Unlike species that had evolved specialized abilities to dominate specific environmental niches, humans had evolved what the researchers termed adaptive generalism, the ability to modify their behavior, thinking patterns, and even their physical responses to meet virtually any challenge. Dr. Velthar's preliminary report noted, human muscle memory formation occurs at approximately 300% the rate observed in comparable species, while their neural pathway adaptation shows even more dramatic variance from galactic norms. Most remarkably, their stress response systems appear designed not just to survive adverse conditions, but to actively learn from them and emerge stronger. Sarah became the primary subject of these studies, though she insisted on maintaining her regular training schedule throughout the research period. The scientists discovered that her performance in the assessment had not been the result of hidden genetic modifications or secret training programs, but rather the natural outcome of human adaptive mechanisms operating under optimal conditions. The research revealed that humans possessed several unique characteristics that, when combined, produced capabilities that no other known species had developed. Their brains showed unprecedented levels of neuroplasticity, allowing them to form new neural pathways and modify existing ones with remarkable speed and efficiency. While other species could learn new skills, humans could fundamentally alter their thinking patterns to accommodate entirely new ways of understanding and interacting with their environment. Human muscle fiber composition showed a unique balance between fast-twitch and slow-twitch fibers that allowed for both explosive power and endurance, but more importantly, their muscular system could adapt its composition based on the demands placed upon it. Sarah's muscle biopsies showed evidence of real-time adaptation during her assessment, with her muscle fibers actually changing their characteristics in response to the evolving challenges she faced. Perhaps most significantly, humans demonstrated what the researchers called tactical evolution, the ability to modify their strategic approaches in real time based on new information and changing circumstances. While other species could adapt their tactics, humans could adapt their entire approach to problem solving, essentially becoming different types of fighters, thinkers, or strategists as circumstances required. The psychological evaluation proved even more revealing. Human psychology, unlike that of more specialized species, was built around what researchers termed constructive dissatisfaction, a fundamental drive to identify weaknesses and limitations and then systematically overcome them. Shinta, the team's psychologist, noted in her report, most species achieve psychological stability by maximizing their natural advantages and avoiding situations that challenge their limitations. Humans achieve psychological stability by systematically identifying and eliminating their limitations. They are, in essence, a species that has evolved to be perpetually dissatisfied with their current capabilities. This psychological framework explained not just Sarah's performance in the assessment, but humanity's entire developmental history. Humans had not evolved superior strength, speed, or specialized abilities because they had evolved something potentially more valuable: the drive and capability to develop whatever advantages a situation required. The research team spent weeks studying video footage of Sarah's assessment, breaking down each movement, each decision, each adaptation. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about learning, adaptation, and the limits of biological potential. Sarah had not simply used techniques from other species, she had understood the underlying principles behind those techniques and then modified them to work with human physiology and psychology. Her fighting style during the later portions of her assessment was not borrowed from any known martial art or combat system. It was something entirely new, created in real time to address the specific challenges she faced. More remarkably, post-assessment testing showed that Sarah had retained all of these adaptations. Her brain scans revealed new neural pathways that had formed during the combat. Her muscle memory had incorporated the new movement patterns, and her tactical thinking had been permanently enhanced by the experience. She didn't just win a fight, Dr. Veltar explained to the research team. She evolved during the fight, and those evolutionary adaptations appear to be permanent. Commander Takvar, who had been following the research with intense interest, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. If one human can demonstrate this level of adaptation in a single assessment, what could humans accomplish with systematic training designed to maximize these capabilities? The answer to that question would reshape military training throughout the galaxy. Dr. Velper and her team developed what became known as the Human Protocol, a training methodology based on the principles they had observed in Sarah's performance. The protocol emphasized adaptive learning over specialization. tactical flexibility over raw power, and systematic self-improvement over natural advantages. When tested on volunteers from other species, the human protocol produced remarkable results. Participants showed improved problem-solving abilities, enhanced tactical thinking, and most surprisingly, increased physical capabilities that seemed to result from their enhanced mental approaches to training and development. A Gorvani warrior who underwent human protocol training improved his gravitational manipulation abilities by 40%, not through enhanced natural powers, but through better understanding of leverage, timing, and tactical application. A Zephyrian pilot increased her flight efficiency by 60% by adopting human approaches to spatial reasoning and environmental adaptation. But the most significant breakthrough came when the protocol was tested on humans themselves. Sarah volunteered for the advanced training program that had been developed based on her performance analysis. The results exceeded every prediction the researchers had made. Within 3 months of beginning the program, Sarah was consistently defeating training constructs that had previously been reserved for the galaxy's most elite warriors. Her adaptability had been systematically enhanced through training methods that challenged her to constantly evolve new approaches to familiar problems. But more importantly, she had begun developing entirely new capabilities that no human had ever demonstrated before. Her reaction times improved beyond what should have been physiologically possible. Her strength-to-weight ratio increased without corresponding muscle mass gains, suggesting that she was learning to use her existing physical resources more efficiently. Most remarkably, she began demonstrating tactical intuition that bordered on precognition, accurately predicting opponent actions several moves in advance. When asked to explain these developments, Sarah's response revealed the true implications of human potential. "I'm not becoming superhuman. I'm becoming more human than I was before. Every challenge teaches me something new about what humans are capable of when they refuse to accept limitations as permanent." The research team's final report, published as a classified document that was distributed to military commands throughout the galaxy, concluded with a warning that would prove prophetic. Humans represent not just a new addition to the galactic community, but a potential paradigm shift in our understanding of biological and psychological development. Their approach to systematic self-improvement, if widely adopted, could make them the dominant species not through conquest, but through simply outgrowing every challenge they encounter. The transformation philosophy. The months following the training floor incident saw Sarah Chen become something unprecedented in galactic society. A human who was respected not as a curiosity or an interesting specimen, but as a warrior and teacher whose methods were being studied by military academies across known space. But perhaps more significantly, Sarah had begun articulating a philosophy that would eventually influence not just human development, but the approach that other species took to their own potential. She called it constructive self-destruction, the deliberate dismantling of one's current limitations in order to build something stronger and more capable. "The biggest enemy any of us faces," she explained to a mixed-species audience at the first Interspecies Adaptation Conference, "is not external opposition, but the version of ourselves that we were yesterday. If you're not actively destroying your weaker self, you're allowing your limitations to become permanent." This philosophy resonated powerfully with humans who had always felt that their species was somehow meant for something greater than their current circumstances suggested. But surprisingly, it also began influencing other species who had previously believed that their natural advantages represented the peak of their potential. Commander Takvar became one of the most unlikely converts to human adaptation philosophy. The hegemony warrior who had initially dismissed humans as soft-worlders began incorporating Sarah's training methods into his own development program. The results were dramatic enough that Hegemony Command authorized a full study of human training methodologies. "I spent my entire life believing that my natural advantages as a hegemony warrior represented my peak potential," Takvar explained in his testimony before the Galactic Military Council. "The human Sarah Chen showed me that natural advantages are just starting points, not limitations. She taught me that every day I didn't actively work to overcome my weaknesses was a day I chose to remain weaker than I could be." Under Sarah's guidance, Takvar had begun systematically identifying and addressing the limitations that he had previously accepted as inherent to his species. His strength increased beyond normal hegemony parameters, but more importantly, his tactical thinking and adaptability improved dramatically. Sarah's training philosophy was deceptively simple in concept but revolutionary in application. It was based on 4 core principles that she had developed through her own experience of systematic self-improvement. Limitation, Identification, the process of honestly assessing current capabilities and identifying specific areas where improvement was needed. This required overcoming the natural tendency to focus on existing strengths and instead systematically cataloging weaknesses and limitations. Adaptive challenge, deliberately seeking out situations that would stress current capabilities and force adaptation. Rather than avoiding difficult challenges or relying on established strengths, this involved actively pursuing experiences that would reveal new limitations and require new solutions. Systematic reconstruction, the methodical development of new capabilities to replace identified limitations. This wasn't simply about getting stronger or faster, but about fundamentally changing approach, methodology, and even thinking patterns to eliminate the root causes of previous limitations. Integration and evolution, the ongoing process of incorporating new capabilities into existing skill sets while remaining open to further adaptation. This required maintaining the mental flexibility to continue changing even after achieving significant improvements. The philosophy attracted attention not just from military organizations, but from academic institutions, technological development groups, and even philosophical societies. The idea that intelligent beings could systematically transcend their apparent limitations challenged fundamental assumptions about species development and individual potential. Dr. Velfa, who had continued studying human adaptation patterns, noted in her research, human philosophy appears to be based on the assumption that current limitations are temporary inconveniences rather than permanent boundaries. This mindset seems to enable them to achieve what should be physiologically and psychologically impossible. The practical applications of Sarah's philosophy began appearing throughout galactic society. Zephyrian engineers began using human adaptation principles to develop technology that could modify its function based on changing requirements. Crystalline philosophers incorporated constructive self-destruction concepts into their meditative practices, learning to reshape not just their physical forms but their thinking patterns. Even the enigmatic voidwalkers, who had previously believed their reality manipulation abilities represented the peak of possible development, began experimenting with human approaches to systematic improvement. But it was among humans themselves that the philosophy had its most dramatic impact. Word of Sarah's achievements and her training methods spread rapidly through human space. Volunteers began arriving at training facilities throughout human territory, all seeking to learn the principles that had enabled one of their species to earn respect from civilizations that had initially dismissed humanity as irrelevant. What they discovered was that Sarah's achievements were not the result of unique genetic advantages or secret technologies, but the systematic application of principles that any human could learn and implement. Training centers based on Sarah's methodologies began producing humans whose capabilities exceeded what xenobiologists had believed possible for the species. These weren't genetic modifications or technological enhancements. They were simply humans who had learned to systematically identify and overcome their limitations. Within 2 years of the training floor incident, human performance in galactic military, scientific, and technological competitions had improved by an average of 300%. More remarkably, these improvements appeared to be accelerating as humans developed more sophisticated approaches to systematic self-improvement. The galaxy began to take notice of humanity not as an interesting addition to the interspecies community, but as a potential game-changing force that could alter the balance of power through sheer adaptability and determination. Commander Thakvar, now serving as a liaison between the hegemony and human military forces, submitted a report that captured the growing recognition of human potential. We initially believed humans were weak because they lacked obvious natural advantages. We now understand that they are potentially the strongest species we have encountered, precisely because they refuse to be limited by the advantages they were born with. Sarah herself had continued evolving throughout this period. Her training had progressed beyond simple combat effectiveness to encompass leadership, strategic thinking, and the systematic development of other humans. She had become not just a warrior, but a teacher whose students were beginning to demonstrate capabilities that challenged galactic assumptions about human limitations. When asked about her long-term goals during an interview with the Galactic Broadcasting Network, Sarah's response revealed the true scope of human ambition. I want to help humans become everything they're capable of being, and then figure out what comes after that. The galaxy has shown us that there are civilizations out there with capabilities we can barely imagine. I want humanity to develop the tools to not just compete with those civilizations, but to help them discover new potentials in themselves as well. The interview concluded with a question that had begun circulating throughout galactic society. If humans can systematically overcome their limitations, what happens when they run out of limitations to overcome? Sarah's answer would become one of the most quoted statements in galactic philosophy. When you truly destroy your weak self, you discover that what you thought were your limitations were actually just the beginning of your real potential. We're not trying to reach some predetermined peak. We're trying to discover how much growth is actually possible when you refuse to accept boundaries as permanent. The training floor incident had begun as a simple combat assessment and had evolved into something much more significant, a demonstration that intelligence, determination, and systematic self-improvement could overcome apparent natural disadvantages and achieve results that challenged fundamental assumptions about biological potential. Sarah Chen had not just cracked a training floor with her punch, she had cracked open new possibilities for what any intelligent being could achieve when they committed to systematically destroying the weaker version of themselves and building something stronger in its place. The galaxy was still trying to understand the full implications of what they had witnessed, but one thing had become clear. Humanity had introduced concepts that could change not just their own development, but the development of every species willing to learn from their approach to systematic self-improvement. As Sarah had proven through her own transformation, the most dangerous opponent any being could face was not external opposition, but their own acceptance of limitations as permanent. And once that opponent had been defeated, there appeared to be no limit to what was possible. The man or woman who destroys their weak self truly could never be destroyed by others, because they had learned the most powerful skill in the universe, the ability to become something greater than they were before, regardless of what challenges they encountered. The training floor incident had ended, but the transformation it had initiated was just beginning.